and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 388, and today's date is June 11th, 2014. And the title of this episode is The Middle East U.S. Puppet Regimes Are Collapsing Just Like the Economy. And we can see that the United States government central bankers are completely losing control of the Middle East. What we are seeing is the people in these countries are saying enough is enough. We're sick and tired of the drone killings. We're sick and tired of another country coming in here, dictating what we need to do, what type of government we need to have, and they want their countries back. We see it happening in Yemen, we see it happening in Libya, we see it in Iraq, we see it in Lebanon, and it is spreading. And these countries are, the puppet regimes are losing ground. They're completely collapsing at this time. They don't know what to do. Most of them are saying that these people are way too strong for their military. Of course, the United States is pumping in billions of dollars, giving them military assets, sending advisors down there, trying to help out. And the biggest worry of the United States government central bankers is that these people will actually overrun the puppet regimes, take control of the country, kick out the private Western Central Bank, and put the oil on sale, not using the U.S. dollar, just like Iran did in 1979, just like Syria does right now. And they're worried about this, and they're looking at the situation, and they're saying, we might have to go into these countries once again, but how are we going to get in there? They continually send down military assets. I mean, in Iraq, they're sending down Apache helicopters, F-16 fighter jets, Hellfire missiles, and they're continually sending, and of course we know the CIA's there helping train the military forces. There was also other military advisors in Iraq at this time, but Iraq is completely falling apart. Libya is taking control of the country, and we understand they have advisories and warnings all over the place at this time. Let's get into the economic collapse news, and we'll eventually get to the section where we're talking about the Middle East again in the report. And what is happening here is that we understand the economy is completely falling apart, and every time they refer back to the first quarter here, they keep revising the GDP, and every single time they revise it down, saying, it was a little bit worse than we thought. And right now, JP Morgan Chase is out there saying, well, GDP wasn't really negative 1.1, it was really more like negative 1.6. And we have to remember, GDP is manipulated. They went back to 1929, they included research and development and other things into GDP and recalculated it all the way up to the present day to make sure we always had a positive GDP. So the economy is actually doing a lot worse than this manipulated calculation, which was supposed to keep us in the positive range. And right now they're saying that, they reduced the GDP in the first quarter, and what we're seeing right now, this is the worst collapse in U.S. economic growth since the recession with this GDP so low. What brought it down? Well, they had to revise the health care. It dropped really by 5.8%. Of course, we understand this is what boosted it up, and then when they took the numbers and when they really looked at it, they said, you know what, healthcare really didn't do what it was supposed to do. A lot of people aren't paying for their policies. It's bringing the whole thing down, and this is why they revised it. And you know what? It'll probably even go further down. And as they keep dropping it, any number that's above this negative number is going to be like, oh, look, the second quarter of GDP, we're doing great. We're only at, negative 0.5. And they're going to spin that like that's a good thing. Of course, they'll use that as, oh, we're recovering. It's coming back together because that was the bad weather, and here we are getting back to normal, which we know that's not true. We understand they'll probably end up revising it, and so on and so forth. And we realize that the economy really isn't doing well. And if we really look at some of the information and the real economic indicators, we see that during the first quarter of this year, reported earnings by major U.S. retailers missed estimates by the largest margin in 13 years. 1 out of every 3 grocery store workers in the state of California is on some form of public assistance. The percentage of Americans that believe that it is a good time to buy a home is the lowest it has been in years. And let me say, the real estate market is completely collapsing at this time. I'm seeing prices being reduced now on many homes. They've been up for sale. This is the hot time for real estate, and I'm not seeing it whatsoever. And I see people who have houses for sale. They're continually dropping it a little bit at a time, because they can't get people to purchase these homes. The percentage of Americans that believe, according to one recent survey, 52% of Americans cannot even afford the house they are living in right now. According to one new study, half of all college graduates are still relying on their parents financially when they are 2 years out of school, and we understand this because people cannot find work once they graduate college, and we see that 80% of the people are having a very rough time, and if they do find work, it is part-time at this time. Right now, 1 out of every 6 men in their prime working years, 25 to 54, do not have a job. The growth of furniture spending has just gone negative for the first time in about 2 years, and we discussed this yesterday in the report. More than 20% of all children in the U.S. are living in poverty, and 49 million Americans are dealing with food insecurity. Approximately 20% of all American families do not have a single member that is employed at this point. So this economy is actually going nowhere except down. It is collapsing in front of our eyes. We see all the indicators. We see retail, what's happening in that sector. We see real estate, what's happening in that sector. And we see unemployment. It is going absolutely nowhere. And after this spring, summer, things are going to start to deteriorate quite quickly. Now, yesterday, I talked about Australia, how if your account was inactive for 3 years, they were going to come in and take your funds. Well, that is not the only country that's doing this. The UK, they were actually the first on the scene, and in 2008, they created the Dormant Bank and Building Society Act. Japan also launched a similar initiative aimed at grabbing dormant bank accounts. The 50 states in the United States have regulations right now pertaining to the seizure of dormant accounts, and the grand prize really goes to Georgia, because if you do not touch your account within 1 year in Georgia, they will take it. If you have a checking account in Georgia that you haven't touched in 12 months, the government can grab it, even though it's your money, which is absolutely ridiculous, because all of this is your money that you worked hard for. You put it into the bank to keep it safe, and the government is stealing it right from under you. Unbelievable. Just because you don't touch something doesn't mean you still don't want it. There's a lot of things. I mean, let's take an example. Let's take physical gold, for example. People purchase physical gold. They might have safes in their home. They put physical gold in their safe, and they don't touch it for 2-3 years. Does that mean someone can come and say, oh, listen, you haven't touched it for 2-3 years. We're allowed to take it right now. This is what's happening in the banking system. They're looking at this saying, well, if you haven't touched it, you really don't need it. Well, maybe I don't want to touch it. Maybe I'm just leaving it there for a rainy day. Again, this goes back to privacy, about government minding their own business, the government getting involved in the banking system and trying to capture this money to bring in revenue and to keep everything propped up the way it is right now. Now, we understand that Russia is now creating their own payment processing system, and it looks like Visa MasterCard is going to process Russian transactions locally by October 31st. And, of course, they promised Russia that they would come in, set up servers inside Russia, and they would be apolitical. They would have nothing to do with politics whatsoever, because they realized when they were implementing their sanctions, Visa, MasterCard on Russia, saying we're not going to process the payments, someone must have come up and said, hey, listen, I just did the calculation, and we are going to lose billions upon billions of dollars. And all of a sudden they said, oh, wait, maybe this isn't a good idea. And now we see that they're going inside Russia and processing everything locally for them. Now, there is a report out there from the World Bank, and they're saying that Russia and the EU would both suffer if sanctions escalate. Energy markets will suffer the most, according to the World Bank. The loss of the European market would cut Russian government revenue by 10% of GDP, and European gas prices would jump 50%. Most dependent EU countries could see higher gas prices. Countries from Central and Southeast Europe like Germany, Italy, Hungary, and Poland are up to 80% dependent on Russian gas imports. And that's not the only thing that will have a problem, because you have to remember, most of these European countries, especially Germany, have a lot of companies inside Russia, and if they impose sanctions on Russia itself, it would affect these companies. And the United States has a lot of companies inside Russia, and this would definitely have some type of boomerang effect. It would come back and it would hit the EU and the United States really, really hard. And this is why they are not placing sanctions on Russia itself or sectors of Russia, and this is why they kept it limited to individuals and companies. Now, in regards to Obamacare, we understand that this was created not to give the people health insurance. They don't care about the people. When I say they, I'm talking about the U.S. government central bankers. They care about their profits. They care about their control. They care about controlling everyone. And of course, they took this and they said, listen, we're going to give health insurance to everyone. It's going to be fantastic. And then when people started looking at the plans, they started looking at what was really being offered to them, they started to realize that this really doesn't benefit us. Actually, it's kind of like a penalty on Americans. And of course, that's why the government officials, Congress were all exempt from Obamacare, because they knew this wasn't for the people. These health care benefits that they were pushing on everyone, they are awful. High deductibles, very high premiums, hardly any benefit. But guess what they do have? A lot of taxes, a lot of penalties to bring in revenue to the government, and Obamacare is completely falling apart. And what's happening is, thanks to a lot of glitches in Obamacare, many Americans may find themselves unexpectedly owing thousands of dollars next tax season, according to one tax expert. This could make next filing season one of the most chaotic in years. Obamacare's tax credit program, which advances tax credits to insurance companies from the IRS based on rough estimates of the applicant's income for the upcoming year, this means that the credit is applied to the applicant's premium far before the taxpayer actually knows what their income will be, and consequently how large a credit they are really eligible for. Here's an example. The government estimates that this tax payable will earn around $30,000 this year, which makes her eligible for about $2,000 tax credit. This $2,000 is paid to the taxpayer's insurance company to help with the premiums. The next spring, our customer taxpayer is filing out of her tax return. Unfortunately, the government estimated the tax earning too little and paid too large a credit. She actually earned $40,000 and so only had to give around $1,500 credit, and they actually gave $2,000. So she's going to owe $500 when taxes comes around. She's going to owe that money back. And this is going to make it very, very difficult for many, many people, because you know what's going to happen. This whole thing is a complete mess. Glitches all over the place. The website doesn't work, and these tax credits are going to go out, and people are going to be getting bills saying you owe $1,000, you owe $1,500, and it is going to make people very angry. It's going to piss them off, and they're going to owe lots of money, and this is not going to help the economy whatsoever. Now, we understand that the government right now is on the agenda to remove arms from the American people. We can see they are pushing their agenda very, very hard at this point. They have many mass shootings, one after another, and of course most of these are false flag events. They are set up to get the public all riled up to say, you know what, this whole gun thing is absolutely ridiculous. We need to take some action. And actually the president was very surprised during the Sandy Hook gun fiasco that they couldn't get the legislation passed. He's shocked. And right now, after all of this, he wants this legislation passed. He wants all these bills put through, and he's saying that it's going to be a very tough time, and he might have to revert to more executive orders. But again, these are not laws. They only refer back to whatever laws being passed to support them, and it's only really for the executive branch, which they refer to at this time. So they really aren't laws, and this is why they're just sitting there doing nothing. They're waiting for the bill to become law so these executive orders can support them. And so far this hasn't been happening. And he's saying that my biggest frustration so far is the fact that society has not been willing to take some basic steps to keep guns out of the hands of people that can do just unbelievable damage, Obama said. Well, of course, most of this is set up, and it's very interesting. When you see something ramped up like we're seeing right now, one after another, getting a lot of play on this Vegas guy, saying that he was connected to the Bundy Ranch, connected to homegrown extremists. You could see they're really pushing the agenda, and they're really pushing it very, very hard at this time. But don't worry. DHS is out there, and since this Oregon shooting, they've come up with some tips to help you if there's some type of mass shooting in a Walmart or in a restaurant or in a school. And this is what they're telling people to do. Have an escape plan in mind. Leave your belongings behind. Keep your hands visible, so when you run outside, the police know it's you and they don't shoot you by accident. Hide out. Hide an area out of the shooter's view. Well, why would you be in the shooter's view? But anyhow, block entry to your hiding place and lock the doors. Silence electronics that could give you away, such as cell phones or pagers. This is the best one. If you find that your life is in imminent danger, well, excuse me, but if there's a shooter out there and they're walking around the building and I'm hiding, my life is in imminent danger. But if your life is in imminent danger, what you need to do is you need to find something to throw at them. Act with physical aggression and throw items at the active shooter. So I'm going to throw my shoe at the shooter who has a gun. I'm going to throw a stapler. I'm going to throw what? I mean, what's in the air? A rock? I mean, please, this is absolutely ridiculous. Instead of them saying, make sure you're armed, because if you're armed, the shooter will think twice. If everyone's armed in the store, guess what? That shooter's done. But if you have everyone throwing shoes at them, this is not going to help. Look what they're giving us. This is before the police even arrive. Do you really think these people who are throwing things at the shooter are going to survive? This is absolutely ridiculous what they're trying to tell people to do. Okay, now, we understand that out in Ukraine, Gazprom has set up a date, June 10th, they're going to cut off the gas. Well, it's June 11th, and Ukraine still haven't paid. But Gazprom and Russia have said, listen, we will go back to the same discounted price that we gave Yanukovych back in the day at $385 per 1,000 cubic meters. And let's work on this, and you can have the same discounted price, and that will be that. And we'll move the prepayment schedule up to June 16th, and we might even do away with it. So let's agree on this. Now, let's see what Ukraine does at this time, because this is what they wanted from the beginning. They wanted this price. This is the price they're getting. Putin, Gazprom are saying, you know what, forget it. Here's the price. You can have it. Let's give everyone gas. And they're saying that if this proposal is rejected, then we'll have to take our relations to an absolutely different stage at this point. And I would say, yes, it would be absolutely ridiculous if they don't accept this, because now they've come back to the discounted price. They're saying, listen, we don't want to shut off the gas. You owe us quite a bit of money. Let's go back to the discounted rate. Let's say everything is good. Just pay us what you owe us right now, and we'll go forward with this discounted rate. And of course, we'll have to see what Yatsenyuk does and the puppet regime, and we'll see what goes on past this time period. Now, the people of Lugansk, They are saying they want Russia to recognize their independence at this time, and they're calling on Russia to do this. And let me just say, the anti-terrorism forces, it has not stopped. It has actually intensified. There is a lot of killings going on. There's a lot of bombing going on, and nothing has been stopped whatsoever. And we have to remember, these southeast regions said, listen, if you pull back your troops, we will reciprocate, and we will pull back our troops, and we will have a discussion about what is going on here. And so far, the Ukrainian government, the puppet regime, haven't done anything at this time. Now, the U.S. intends to permanently maintain a military contingent in Eastern Europe in order to train special forces units around the Soviet bloc countries, the former Soviet bloc countries. Long-term plans include further training drills that will consistently keep about 100 elite U.S. troops on the ground at any one time in the NATO states close to Russia. So they're not pulling out whatsoever. They are staying in this area. They're bringing in more military assets, more troops to the area, training more people, and this does not look like this is going in the right direction at this time. And we know this direction is actually to get into war. Now, the U.S. military, we understand, is in Sudan, it's in Chad, it's in other parts of Central Africa, and the U.S. military's African Command is supervising a project to improve communications for allies in North Africa. The contract represents an effort to enhance U.S. military operations amid the al-Qaeda threat in North Africa. Of course, this is what they're using. They're saying al-Qaeda is everywhere now. Al-Qaeda is in North Africa. Of course, the other side is China, with the people of these countries who do not want the private Western central banks there or the U.S. government. Of course, these people are called Al-Qaeda. They're setting up this radar type of system to help pinpoint different locations. In a statement on June 6th, the Pentagon said the SES would purchase commercial on-orbit transponders to support Ku-band communications for AFRICOM. The contract also called for support for a base year and for 1-year options. So they are really pushing their agenda forward in Central Africa. They are not letting up. Now, in Uganda, they are saying they have uncovered a Western-funded rebel group. And we know that the United States, the central bankers, UK, Israel, Arab nations, they all invest in these groups to start something up, to create a crisis. And right now, Uganda said Wednesday that a new cult-like rebel army has been formed with financial support from Western individuals, according to a DPA report. The funding for the newly organized rebel group comes from the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, the Uganda police spokesman claims. 6 people, including a senior army official, have been arrested in connection with the group. They're going to appear in court on Thursday on treason charges. The new group is called God's Resistant Army. GRA is similar to the Lord's Resistant Army, which devastated northern Uganda for decades and displaced up to 2 million people. The GRA started recruiting in the West Nile at the end of last year, and now they have expanded to other areas in the northern region. They have been getting funds from the United States, Britain, Canada, and Australia. We are investigating their funds. They have been getting money and clothes, the spokesman said. So we can see here is another area in Central Africa where they're creating this group where they're saying here's another crisis. They did it in Sudan, they're doing it in Nigeria, they're doing it in Uganda, they did it in Mali, and they're doing it in all of these countries because they're trying to capture the natural resources. And of course, on the other side is China. Most of the countries inside Central Africa are removing the dollar from reserves, ramping up on the yuan/renminbi. We understand that Kenya is a clearinghouse, and of course, the central bankers, they want to stop this right now. Now, out in Iran, we understand the P5+1 talks are going on. We understand that the July 20th date is coming up very soon. And if they can't reach an agreement, the interim deal is pretty much dead in the water. And the United States government is looking at this and saying, you know what, I don't know if we're going to expand this further if we can't come to an agreement by July 20th. And if we can't agree on this, we're going to impose sanctions on Iran and take other methods of making Iran do what we want. And we can see that this is starting to build now. Senators in the United States are talking about new sanctions, talking about there's no extension after July 20th, and as July 20th rolls around, we'll have to see how this turns out. Now, in Iraq, there are major problems. Right now, militants seize a Turkish consulate in the northern Iraq city of Mosul, including the consul and 3 children at this time, and Turkey is on high alert. NATO is on high alert. The state of Turkey was put on high alert. All institutions of Turkey are now on high alert. NATO ambassadors, on the other hand, held an emergency meeting on June 11th evening at Turkey's request to discuss the situation in Iraq. Haig said while the situation was of great concern, the government was not at the stage of sending in British military at this time. A U.S. official told AFP that the United States stands ready to help Iraq, but no mention of sending troops. Now, the militants, ISIS fighters, have moved into Iraqi oil refinery center of Biji, or is it called Baji? And this is 200 kilometers southeast of Mosul. They torch the court and police buildings and warn local police soldiers not to challenge them. We're coming to die or control Baji. So we advise you to ask your sons in the police and army to lay down their weapons and withdraw. With the Mosul refinery, the Islamists now control Iraq's northern oil refinery facilities. Just like in Libya, it seems like the same thing is playing out, and this is getting the United States central bankers very nervous, because if they can control the refineries, they can control the cities, they can control the ports, they might try to sell this oil not using the US dollar, and the central bankers will not have this. They will not let this happen. And right now, the same group has stolen about $400 million from the Mosul Central Bank. And let me tell you, the central bankers must be sitting there going, oh, this is really pissing us off. They better not remove the central bank. They better not sell this oil, or we're coming in there. And you can see that this whole thing is starting to fall apart very quickly. Oil prices might start to rise because of the situation in Iraq at this time. Oil prices are set to hike in the next few days, with the growing fear that the fighting in the northern city of Mosul will spread southwards in Iraq. And they're losing control. And why would oil prices go up? Well, of course, they're worried about them taking control, but what happens if they started selling the oil not using the US dollar? And countries said, you know what, I will buy that oil, and I will use gold, I will use the ruble, I will use a renminbi. Libya also saying, you know what, let's start selling the oil again. No one using the US dollar, which means those US dollars are removed from reserve, because other countries look at this, and if one country's doing it, why can't we? Let's not use the US dollar. Let's bypass the dollar. It will be cheaper to buy this oil. The dollars come flooding back to the United States, and what do we see? The devaluation of the dollar. And what becomes more expensive? You got it. Oil, food, goods, pretty much everything. Now, the U.S. is considering sending emergency military aid to Iraq. Now, they're already sending Apache helicopter, F-16 fighters, Hellfire missiles, and now they're considering sending emergency military supplies far and above what we've been talking about. And the reason for this is because they really can't send troops in at this time, because it looks kind of suspicious. We pulled the troops out. They said everything was fine, and now everything's falling apart. And we're seeing the same thing in all the other countries. In Yemen, someone cut the power, and the entire city of Yemen is completely without power at this time. That's how fast this can happen. And American officials were adamant that no U.S. troops would be sent back to Iraq. However, CIA officers have been helping the Iraqi armed forces defend themselves during recent fierce fighting with the people of Iraq who are fighting back, according to a number of intelligence and diplomatic sources. The Pentagon has admitted that it had sent a small special forces group to Jordan to train military units, as well as those to Iraq. And we can see that They're doing everything they possibly can, sending in military advisors, having CIA there, but you know what always happens. Eventually, these advisors, these trainers, all of a sudden they get fired upon. The United States, all right, that's it, we're going in there, and this is how it starts. Now, Samantha Powers, the UN ambassador to the UN, is now talking to Turkey, Jordan, to discuss what they're going to do with Syria. U.S. Ambassador to United Nations Samantha Powers will travel to Jordan and then to Turkey to discuss a range of issues, including the effects of the conflict in Syria. The meetings are going to take place June 10th and the 14th. And until the 14th, I should say, the Obama administration is relaunching a campaign to remove President Assad, even though he won more than 88% of the votes in recent elections, which does legitimize his presidency. Samantha Powers is planning the next step to remove the Assad government. Now, what are they planning at this time? How are they going to go in? And now they can use some type of force to sneak into Syria and to try some type of assassination, or they might say, you know what, the only way to get in there right now is to use some type of an event. And we can see right now that they are actually really preparing to do something. They're not just going to let this go. They didn't put all of this into place to say, forget about it. He won the elections, let him have Syria. They're not doing that whatsoever. They brought in anti-tank, anti-aircraft weapons. They've been training the paid mercenaries. They kicked out the Syrian government, and they sent all the government officials out of the United States. They brought in the paid mercenaries, or they like to call them the opposition, and said, you are now the acting government. You're the liaisons or the acting government of Syria at this time. President was out there saying Assad has no future there. They're having training exercises in Jordan. They brought military assets into the region. They've been training paid mercenaries at secret bases in Jordan and Qatar. They are not going to stop. They're going to push forward. They are just coming up. Well, most likely their plan's already been done. They're keeping the chemical weapons in Syria because they still have the treaty, and that means they still have to honor it. They're trying to prove that he's been using chlorine weapons, and this is like a stall tactic at this time by the United States government, central bankers, until they can get this plan ramped up. And we can see that they're not going to stop. Their agenda has always been the same. Their goal has always been the same: remove Assad. And this is exactly what they're going to do. They will not stop. And what we can expect is something big to happen, because they've been putting all the pieces into place. They've been making sure that they're ready to really move in, and they realize the Middle East is completely falling apart. Iraq is in turmoil. Yemen is in turmoil. Libya is in turmoil, and they realize this petrodollar system is completely collapsing upon itself, and they really need to maintain control and get into Syria to prop it up, and then move into Iran to prop it up, and this is what they're going to continually do. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.